You just have to keep going. You have to want it enough to wake up tomorrow and do the same thing over.
This was me being a hustler.
The only way that I've gotten to this point in my life is to try to treat people the way I want to be treated.
Welcome to Ground Zero Growth with your host, Sam Sapp, owner of Lockbon.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us on Ground Zero Growth. I'm joined today with Keith Davenport, value-based serial entrepreneur and founder of Blazer Strategies. How are you doing today, Keith?
Good, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
So, you and I talked ultimately before hopping on the podcast, and when you said value-based serial entrepreneur, that was the first thing I'm reminded of. What had you start, because you have a couple coffee shops, if I recall, and you had a very specific reason for starting those. Can you kind of talk about that before we go too much further?
Yeah,
because I think that plays into your value base, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. In fact, most business people would think I'm a little crazy for this choice. So my wife and I bought Groundhouse Coffee and Bakery in Gardner, Kansas, our hometown. We took over last July, and so it was a pre-existing business. It was founded in 2011. At that time, had 2 locations. We're right now narrowing it down to just one, but we bought it not because we wanted to make money out of it, but because it's the centerpiece of the community. So our town, we have about 25,000 people in our town, and there's just not a lot of places that people can go during the day for meetings or connections. There's not a lot of date sites in the evenings, and it's just this really community-centric part of Gardner. We often call it the heart of Gardner. So that is a great example. So I've talked. It's not a lucrative venture by any means. It's a lot of work for not much money. At the same time, I wouldn't ever let it go because it's just so much a part of our community and wanting to preserve that fact in our community.
That's cool. And so tell me about too, for folks listening that can't quite tell, Keith is in a park right now, operating out of his park for the podcast, which I honestly think might be perfect. I don't know, kids in the background, that's just a fun added to any experience in my opinion. But kind of tell me a little bit about that, because you had mentioned you don't quite have an office of your own, a little bit of a virtual nomad, it sounds like, so to speak.
That's exactly right. So especially during the summer. So a lot of times I work from home, which is great, but I have 4 kids and they are all home on summer vacation. And my wife works from home. And even my daughter, she's a cello player. She's 15. She gives private cello lessons. So right now I had to leave home because there were private cello lessons going on. And so we would have cello in the background. I have an office at the coffee shop, but I share that with the other managers, and I always feel bad about trying to kick them out whenever I have to do a podcast recording. So one of my favorite places to work, if I can't work at home and I can't work at the coffee shop, is a library in Olathe, which is 15 minutes down the road from me. And so I had a great spot picked out, and then somebody came and sat right behind me like this. And so their back of their head would have been in the podcast the whole time. So then I moved to a second spot. There's too much background noise. So then I finally moved outside, and this is the best I could do right now for my nomadic lifestyle.
I love it. And I shout out to libraries. My first couple of years, my office was one of those library breakout rooms or study rooms.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Those are great for that. That's cool. So, you're pouring everything into, I mean, when you say value-based serial entrepreneur, you're not kidding.
Yeah. So, and I know we'll get into this a little bit, but I grew up in a very religious household. I was a pastor for about a decade. I moved away from that personally, professionally, and spiritually now. But some of the same values that I learned from that tradition, particularly around building up a community, helping those who tend to be on the short end of the stick when it comes to the economy or public policy and so on. Those things have all stuck with me throughout. And so the whole intent of me working on starting and buying these businesses has been very much around the idea of increasing wages in my hometown and economic activity. I give the example. So I am just finished going through a whole drama of buying a new house where we had 2 different contracts fall through. If we sold our house, needed to find a new, it was a mess. But in doing that, we sold our house for almost twice as much as what we bought it for 10 years ago. At the same time, wages in my hometown have stayed pretty much flat in terms, especially the top line wages. And so for an individual wanting to work in my hometown, you could probably count on your 10 fingers the number of jobs that pay more than 50,000 or 55,000 a year, which isn't enough to buy a house, which now a starter home, you're lucky if you can get it for less than 300,000 in our town. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring better jobs into the community and be more intentional about the economic development. And rather than waiting on maybe a government initiative to do that, I've just started doing that with my business ventures.
Right. Well, I love that. I love that notion ultimately because, I mean, that's what's going to theoretically help drive things forward, right? More people like, hey, this is something we need to do for our local community, and that's ultimately what drives growth in the community, right?
Yeah, and I think the other component is uh, we're developing pipelines for careers for people. So an individual might start working in the coffee shop. They're a high school student or a college student. They're working part time, uh, or maybe they even start as an intern at Blazer Strategies. Yeah, they're a college student. They need an intern as a part of their degree program. Well, then fast forward a little bit, they have an opportunity to maybe move to another business in an upward mobility role, another business in my portfolio. And so we try and do that. We can kind of steer people through the businesses into higher paying positions. But eventually, most people are going to go out and do something else on their own, whether that's working for somebody else, starting their own business or whatnot. But what we are able to do is instill in them some of the values that we hold in all of our businesses, particularly being very people centric businesses. So thinking about our human resource policies, our hiring, the way we treat and communicate to one another, what our priorities are. When we are able to start investing in individuals as high school students or college students, that becomes the only work environment they've ever experienced. And if they ever get into a work environment that tends more on the toxic side, they can call it out quicker because they know it's so much different than what they experienced with Blazer Strategies or Groundhouse Coffee. So I think there's an opportunity to sort of reproduce this value-based leadership. It doesn't always have to come in the form of entrepreneurship, but I'm very open about my civic engagement with my employees. Everyone knows about that. And so there's just a great natural opportunity to replicate leaders who also have some of those same values for their community.
That's an awesome concept. I like what you're talking about there. Um, so let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit here, Keith.
Sure.
Let's go back to kind of the high school period is where I really like to start things off.
Yeah.
So, you imagine around then you're starting to get towards the end of high school. Where are you going to go to college? What are you going to do for the rest of your life? And that's kind of thing that for some reason I feel like, at least in my mind, right around that period, that's the question. It's like, what's your career? What are you going to do for the rest of your life? Huh? You going to be an engineer? You going to be an accountant? What are you going to do? And I also feel like that's when external influence is at its peak, right? Because it's kind of like, well, I want to be a cowboy space astronaut, superstar. And it's like, well, with regards to career availability, we don't really have one of those yet. So you might be better off going for a degree in
Yeah.
marketing.
Yeah.
And so what's Keith thinking about? What's going through his head and what's kind of the environment?
Yeah. So I think you called it out just right that I think through elementary school and probably through middle school, we give people a lot of space to dream, to be whatever they want to be. But as soon as you hit your freshman year of high school, my daughter just finished her freshman year. As soon as you hit that freshman year, you take career classes and career inventories, and it tells you what you might fit for. They talk a lot more about the budgeting, practical side, and all of a sudden you have different variables you're taking into consideration when you're deciding what to do. For me, though, it's kind of a different perspective. I mentioned I grew up in a religious household. I actually felt like by the age of 9 that I was going to be a pastor. So there was no question about what I was going to do for a career through high school. That was pretty straightforward. I knew I was going to be a pastor. And I'm not a pastor now. So that creates, I suppose, an interesting story and journey there. I knew for the most part, where I was going to go to school, I had it at one point. There was a second option, but that only lasted for a short amount of time. So I knew exactly where I was going to go to school. I knew exactly what I was going to study. So I didn't have some of that um, tension or back and forth or pressure or uncertainty about what I was going to do, which kind of makes for I don't know. I didn't quite relate to that. And so now I'm still trying to coach my kids that no matter what somebody else says, just do whatever you want to do. Because that's just kind of been the trek of my life.
I love that. So what was that? What was that progression then? So you know you're 9 years old. I'm going to be a pastor. Period. Right.
Yeah,
What's kind of the church and denomination that you're in currently? My assumption is that it's like that's the lane I'm going to be pastoring
yeah.
in. And you know, what I mean, did you go to a degree for a theology school? What was the plan there?
Sure. So I was connected with the Church of the Nazarene, which is a smaller denomination in the U.S., kind of similar to United Methodist or Wesleyan in terms of theological camps and history. Its international headquarters is in the Kansas City metro. I grew up in Illinois, though, in a real small town there. And yes, I wanted to go in the trajectory of being a pastor with the Church of the Nazarene. While I was in high school, I actually set up my own pastoral internships. And so the summer between my junior and senior year, I lived 3 hours from home and was like a youth pastor intern at a Nazarene church that was far from home. And then I did the same after I graduated high school. The summer between high school and college, I moved out and was a youth pastor intern again. And so, yep, went to school. I went to Olivet Nazarene University, about an hour south of
So you've kind
Chicago.
of always been a little bit entrepreneurial. I mean, the type of person that goes out and gets pastoral internships in their high school. I mean, it just is that normal in the Nazarene church? Because it sounds unique to me in a
Yeah,
good way.
yeah, uh, yeah, definitely unique. I think back then I would have just like attributed it to being a leader and having people in my life that encouraged me to be a leader. I think now I attribute it a little bit to just last year I finally accepted the fact that I have ADHD with the formal diagnosis and so on. And so there's a little bit that I attribute in my neurodivergence because I can be hyper focused on a goal. I can be oblivious or not care about as many risks, and I can be very much more uh, looking into the future. And so back then, it didn't feel like a big deal. I literally sent letters out to dozens of churches across Illinois and asked if any of them would be willing to hire me as an intern for the summer. And one of them did. And I just moved. And really kudos to my mom who just empowered me to do that and let that happen. I'm sure that was not easy for her at the time. So, yeah, it was unique. Definitely is true to form even today of I don't like to go the standard path. And I tend to, if I have an idea, think that I can make it happen no matter what. Not always true, but I try to make it true as more times than not.
That's I would love to zero in on that. So I haven't had it formally diagnosed necessarily, but I've had quite a few people and professionals even like, you know, that's stereotypical ADHD, right? And I was like, yeah, I don't think I need the diagnosis. But you know, one of them asked once, they're like, are you taking something for it? Why aren't you taking something for it? Do you want to take something for it? And I was like, I worry I'd lose my superpower, you know, and maybe I would love losing my superpower, right?
Yeah,
It's like, you know, you take this thing and you're like, but I don't know, you know, I haven't even taken Adderall or anything to that effect enough for long enough to know the effects, whether it be positive or negative. And there's a part of me that's like, you know, what's the harm in trying? And then
yeah.
there's another part of me that is, again, it's kind of like, I don't know, if you believe it's a superpower, which I do, I don't know why I would want to give it up.
Yeah, I use that exact same phrase of giving up my superpower, or really just even giving up myself. Like, this is the way my mind has always worked. What if I take medicine and my mind works differently? I will feel like it's not me. And I kept pushing into that. So, kind of the timeline. So in September of 23 is when I launched Blazer Strategies. I was in the midst of the ownership transition, heading towards closing date, the middle of 24 for the coffee shop. And things are really starting to pick up. Blazer Strategies was growing. I had a ton of clients. I had recruited a ton of contractors to work with us. And I was really struggling to manage my day, to figure out where to dedicate my time, how to use my capacity, my limited capacity in various ways. And so I talked with a doctor about ADHD. I actually finally was open to it because a couple of my kids were diagnosed, and I started to learn more about it from them. And then I realized, oh, it is me. I do have ADHD. So I tried to manage it. I hired an executive coach who specializes in ADHD. She was fantastic. I learned a lot of skills and coping mechanisms that could really help. So I hired a virtual assistant who's now my director of finance, who does a lot of the things that were hard for me as an individual with ADHD. But it wasn't enough. I still could tell that I wasn't being as productive as I needed to be successful in my roles. So just in January of this year, I did decide I'd start taking medication, and I am so I started that journey. And really, as far as my feeling or my thinking patterns, I don't notice any difference into how I feel. And so I still am able to leverage my superpower. I think the biggest way that it's helped me is it's opened up my sort of my blinders when I'm hyper focused on something. I love what I do professionally, and I love the excitement of new big initiatives in the midst of that. And what that would often do, it would cause me to really skip over things that I assessed as not important or that I just didn't like doing.
Mm.
In business, you can kind of imagine if you just stop writing checks to people who you owe, that would become a problem. Now, I didn't quite do that. Like, that's not
No,
an
but I know
actual
what you mean.
example.
You're
Yeah,
right. You're just taking it to the utter
yeah,
extreme of examples of like, the moment you thought you could get away with it not being important and that was acceptable and passable, which I can. So as somebody with ADHD, there's this personality test that's like Samuel struggles with documentation protocols and documentation, right? And then it's like, okay, what could Sam benefit most from in his sales progression? And it's like documentation and processes. It's like, dang
yeah,
it. So
yep,
I get what you're saying. And I'm interested to hear about your progression as well. Like, have you found yourself to be more effective?
yeah, absolutely. So I have, I guess it's called comorbidity, which is uh, awful term, but I have another diagnosis as well with general anxiety disorder. And so co-occurring
I thought for sure
diagnoses.
comorbidity was like the second thing that might have killed them.
Uh, so there's another,
You're good.
it could also fit into this
Well,
conversation.
maybe I'm just it's yeah. I'm not familiar with that term. That's other than like CSI Miami or
Yeah.
something.
And I could be wrong. I'll
No, you're
uh
good. But
I'll start this
you have
part
two
over in case.
things,
Yeah, I
right?
have
You
two
have two
things,
diagnoses.
and they feed on each other. So
Mm,
if I find myself um, being overstimulated, which tends to be ADHD, I also have increased anxiety.
yep.
And so what it's been able to do, I treat both my anxiety and my ADHD with medication, and it's allowed me to not experience as much of that like co-occurring symptoms of like
Gotcha.
overstimulated, overwhelm, anxiousness, spiraling, and that allows me to push through things that otherwise would be uh, paralyzing. A great example, I've alluded to these stresses we had with finding a house this summer. So we had a house under contract. We had an offer on our house. We agreed to sell our house, but then our contract fell through with the sellers. So we had like 15 days to find another house in order to still close with our buyers. Found another house, came back that they'd flipped it without filing permits, and so a lot of things weren't up to code. So we're like, this house is scary. We're not going to move in here. So then we're down to 5 days to have a house under contract so that we actually could have our own home. And
What a
then,
stressful
oh
ordeal
my word, the
that
month of
you seem to
June.
have just gotten the worst of.
Yeah. But in addition to that, we made the decision to close one of our units at the coffee shop. I was in conversations with a small business about maybe acquiring it. I was negotiating a potential lease for another endeavor, and I was trying to move Mythic Hire, which is my third business, which is in HR tech. I was trying to move that forward. I was doing all these things at once, and um, I'm pretty sure that if I was unmedicated, I would have just stayed in bed the whole time, and it allowed me to push through. It was still stressful. Don't get me wrong. It was
Right.
incredibly stressful, but I still had the wherewithal to be able to navigate it in a way that I'm still living on July 1st. So that
Yeah.
was the success story there. And it really would have been paralyzing had I not had the assistance of medication for those.
Well, and so as we're talking about this, for some reason, there's a book I read once upon a time that's just, if you like wild books, I think it was like a free gimme at one point on Audible or something, and it was called Stealing Fire. And this is just the type of book that I'd get lost in. And it's the entire notion basically of experimenting with different mental states and through chemical modifying drugs in a lot of cases. And he gives wild examples, like apparently Elon Musk has been known to show up at Burning Man at least once or twice. In fact, Solar City, one of his many ideas, supposedly came out of Burning Man. And Google CEOs and other folks like that have been known to leverage like psilocybin, shrooms, different things like that. And the whole book is basically just this experimental discovery on the notion of like, the human experience and
Yeah.
how different experiences and moments change our way of thinking. But then also, I think what it was specifically trying to get to is radical moments like through psilocybin, for example, or whatever, can radically alter your trajectory just from there. And it didn't even, it gives examples even with outside of drugs. There's a concept apparently called rapture of the deep, where deep uh divers, I can't even think of what it's called. It's like free diving. They don't use any sort of tank or anything, and their whole purpose is to see how long and how deep they can get on their lung capacity. Well, there's a point in time where lack of oxygen actually puts them into this sort of like amazing transcendental position. And there have been people that have drowned because they've specifically just gone down, entered that experience, and not come back.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I wish I had a question there, but it's just for some reason that's what made me think of with you when you're talking about ADHD and the medications and
Yeah.
the being more effective in business.
But I think that there's a bigger question here about overall wellness and health in entrepreneurship and in business. So the example that I was thinking of, so Steve Jobs, I've learned a lot about his biography, watched several of the movies based on his life and so on. And especially in college, he was very much in the hippie scene and did drugs. And there was definitely a sense that his ideas for Apple may have came out of some of those experiences. But then you fast forward in Steve Jobs' life, still, I think that most would say he was one of, if not the most influential technical innovators in the 20th century. But when you look at his life, his like personal life was really broken. He for the first good share of his daughter's life, he was an absent father, broken relationships there. There was questions towards the end of his life. I don't remember all the details, but the decision on not sharing about his cancer, maybe not seeking some treatment and so on. There was definitely the workaholic pieces. He's notorious for the way that he treated employees. He was so much committed to the design that often he would lose sight of valuing the people in front of him. And I'm not trying to bring a judgment against Steve Jobs here necessarily, but what I am trying to say is whatever we decide to do as business leaders, regard to our physical and mental well-being, it has consequences, and
Yeah.
being able to figure out what your goals are. So, we at the top of this podcast, you introduced me as a value-based entrepreneur. So for me, it's possible that by using drugs or seeking those mental states that I could have better, um, more affluent, more wealth bringing ideas than I have now. However, and the same could be said, if I worked more hours, I could make more money, or I could be more successful, be bigger, and so on. But that's not my goal. And so, really thinking about the way in which we leverage medications or recreational drugs, medicinal drugs, and so on, uh, in a way that gives us a holistic well-being. Uh, I I have found it's one of the most challenging things as an entrepreneur to keep myself healthy, but also one of the most important. I still have a long way to go, but I am at my best when I am healthy, uh, like in all meanings of that word. I make more effective decisions. I respond to crises better. I treat people better. I manage stress better. All of those things come into play. Um, and it's easy historically, or as a third person, to trace a line from some transcendental experience to an outcome because we're tracing that thread. But what sometimes gets lost in tracing that thread is we don't see the whole of that person's life and the other ways it may have impacted them that may not have been so uh, epic or uh,
Yeah.
visionary. It
Right.
could have been very much broken. And I think like we're whole people, and you can't separate us out from the visionary Keith and the dad Keith, or the entrepreneur Keith and the husband Keith. Those are all the same person. And for me, I can't give up any of the familial relationship parts of who I am in order for the business parts of who I am to succeed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you say that. That's because that it in business, it's a wild thing. It does seem like you have to choose at one point. You have to have your priorities in order, right? Because it'll, especially in business and in entrepreneurship, and then especially when you want to make a positive impact on the community, right? At first it's like, of course I'll join your chamber of commerce, and then there's more, and then there's more, and then there's more, and then it's like, well, of course I'll support your nonprofit, and then you realize just how many there are, and then in the same token, it's kind of like, well, okay, for me, I have this mental allowance of like how many after hours events I can and will go to
Yeah.
before I realize that I am taken too much from home in a
Yeah.
way that, so yeah, it's I don't know, it's an interesting thing. I think I appreciate you saying that, I guess is what I'm getting at. So let's talk more about your progression. So
Yeah.
all right, so you're going to be a pastor. You're interning at these different places
Yep.
to be a pastor. And where did we go from there? I mean, you own 3 businesses now. How's that look?
Sure. So I'll give you like the short summary version, and then you can decide where you want to dig deeper. So I went to undergrad, Olivet Nazarene University, studied pastoral ministry, got a bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry. It was a denominational Christian school south of Chicago. While I was there, I worked in missions for a little bit and student government. Then I moved to Kansas City. I was married by this point. Went to seminary, got a Master of Divinity. I was pastoring a church. Really ended up in the space where I was in charge of all the church communications, and I really enjoyed that. I was in some government-related grants and things, so I got my feet wet there. I ended up shifting. I was an associate pastor at that point, moved to be a lead pastor at a church in Lawrence, Kansas, which is home to the University of Kansas. And that church, though, it didn't have a salary. So I had to work full time outside of being a pastor. So I ended up working in student development at Johnson County Community College, which is our local community college, has about 17,000 students or so. And I got that job because of my student government engagement while I was an undergrad. Really enjoyed that, but burned out. So I lived in between the college and the church. I had to drive 30 minutes to either one to get there. And so I was always driving. And I found myself always having to choose, am I going to spend time playing with my kids or am I going to work on my sermon right now? And that got to be really challenging, overriding. Stepped away from ministry at that point and just dedicated myself completely to higher education. But eventually found that I had a ceiling of where I could go because in higher ed, if you're thinking about industries or workplaces that care about your educational background, higher ed probably is number one. So because my degrees were in pastoral ministry and a Master of Divinity, it was very difficult for me to have any upward mobility because those degrees didn't really translate to other work areas. Eventually, I shifted, moved into local government. So I started working in the public information office for Johnson County government. I was in charge. I was in charge of social media. So I managed 5 accounts, but then there was about 35 departments and agencies, and I was responsible for all the policies and strategy consulting for all those accounts. It's about 150 accounts total. Got recruited by the mental health department to go there and be their communications manager. So I took over all of communications there. I really liked local government, went back to school, got my master's of public affairs with the intent of having a long-term career uh, in local government. Then the pandemic came along, and working in mental health during the pandemic was really challenging. I got to a really unhealthy place. Uh, ultimately, I left government, started working in a nonprofit again. I was working with the
Do you
Missouri.
mind
Yeah.
zeroing in on the pandemic and
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, there's a few things there. So one was the work itself was really challenging. So
And you're
by
in the
this
government sector at this point. Are you
in the
still doing
government
the social
sector,
media thing?
so at this point, I was responsible for all marketing communications with the mental health center, and so I had a team under me at this
Oh,
point.
wow. Okay.
And so on the front end of the pandemic, so probably I don't remember because it's really a blur. 9 months, 18 months, I'm not sure. But every day in the morning, the executive team would meet. So that's, our executive director, deputy director, all the department heads. I was not a part of that executive team. They would meet, and then after that, they would send me their notes. I had to rewrite their notes into communication that would go out to our staff and to the public. But before I could do that, I often had to chase details around. By the end of the day, I had to have that ready to go. So every day was crisis communication for months and months and months. And so that was rather exhausting. There was a lot of external things going on in the world at that point that exacerbated that. So a lot more conversations around racial differences. That was the election cycle for where Biden and Trump were running for president at that point. So there was a lot of debate about what science is really true and what's fake. Time the community all over the world was seeing that isolation due to quarantine was having a negative impact on mental health and just the disruption of our everyday routines. So there was a lot of that pressure. So the work itself got to be quite challenging. But then I was also a person just like everybody else in the midst of that. So I was experiencing my own mental health challenges. I didn't even start treating my anxiety disorder for another 2 years after the pandemic started. Actually, no, 3 years. 3 years after the pandemic started. So um, I was in the midst of an incredibly stressful situation, working ridiculous hours with untreated anxiety disorder and untreated ADHD. Um, my hyper focus that comes from ADHD was very much on my work which caused me often to not be empathetic or understanding for others when they wanted to do more relational things. I always had more work to do. And the biggest conflict in this came, I had coworkers who really like to do uh, regular lunches together. So after quarantine had stopped, everyone was back in the office. We were still being careful, but if you were vaccinated, you could be together. And I just hated them, and because I had to do work, and I felt like they were a waste of time. I have different perspectives on them now, but that was my perspective then, and it just caused a lot of conflict because from their perspective, why is this guy not wanting to go to lunch with us? Why does this guy feel like so I really looked like a jerk in the way that people were experiencing me. So a lot of challenges there. I know that hindsight, I didn't know that while I was in the middle of it. In the middle of it, I just had a lot of conflict. So yeah, that all those things together, I actually tried for quite some time to just move to a different department in county government because I did really enjoy it. I just needed to get out of that specific space. But nothing opened up. So eventually I found a job at a nonprofit as an executive director and stepped into that role. That was the end of 2021 that I made that shift.
Well, and it's so, I mean, you talk about a lot of relational conflict and ADHD, and there's always work to do in the mission. Well, what you didn't say, and what I kind of heard is the mission supersedes all, which it's interesting. And I tell folks too when it's like if it's what do we need to do for entrepreneurship or for and the speech I was giving at the time was on networking, but it's interesting to me because you do have to, as an entrepreneur, at least in a business, you need to have a mission that's pretty lofty and you need to believe in it because otherwise you're not going to do that difficult stuff that you need to do, right? Well, but at the same time, you're right. There's an empathetic component. There's like you know, uh, how do we navigate a relationship that we've had for so long, but then also maybe can't sustain anymore for one reason or another? And we grow up, people grow out of relationships all the time, but it's an interesting thing that you talk about. It hits a little bit close to home, perhaps in some cases.
Yeah, and relationships are by far the most important and the hardest part of not just business but life, right? So I remember when I first took over the coffee shop, anytime somebody would quit and go work someplace else, I kind of took it a little personally, like, oh, what I'm creating isn't good enough, either to take care of your needs or is not the right fit for you. Um, and so it was hard anytime somebody left on the front end. After a while, you get used to that. But there are some times when it does hurt more than others, where if you have someone that you've really invested in and given opportunities for growth, who eventually something goes sideways and they step out, that can be really hard. I think that one of the best things that an entrepreneur can have is self-awareness. So I know that relationships are sometimes hard for me, which I think people might be surprised by me saying that from a like I'm very much engaged in the community. I have a really strong network. I am well known for helping connect others to jobs or resources that they need, and so on. It just takes a lot of work for me. It doesn't quite come as naturally as some. So one of the ways that I have to compensate for that is bringing people around me who are really good at relationships and aren't afraid to tell me the truth, and so that they can help give me feedback on what I'm doing. I had an example this week where uh, I was trying to navigate a challenging situation. And so before I responded to it, I called my wife and I was like, hey, this is what's going on. This is kind of what I'm thinking. Like, how do I actually need to respond to this? And so she gave me some feedback. And it sounds a little bit funny, really, when you think about, hey, here's this serial entrepreneur who is running 3 companies and has been engaged in politics and has 2 master's degrees, who has to call his wife before he can respond to a text message. But it's just really true, and it comes from um, 2 things. One, not calling my wife first and then blowing up something that didn't need to get blown up. And the self-awareness of, hey, I know this isn't my best place. And what this is, the topic that we're talking about is really important. So I just need another set of eyes on this to make sure that I'm communicating what I'm intending to communicate. And that's usually where the gap is. It's not that I intend to be a jerk or I intend to blow things up. It's that um, I'm super direct all the time and don't always think from an empathetic lens of what I'm saying. And so it's helpful to get that feedback. And so I noted that about myself, and I invite it when I can.
I've absolutely come to love some of the AI LLMs for that. It's almost like I view them almost like a like an interpreter a little bit for me, because I can input my raw thoughts as like, look, this is what I want to convey, but I also recognize that going about it directly
Yeah.
may not come off the right way for the average person. So, and then the response is epic. It's like, wow, that is exactly what I wanted to convey in a very digestible fashion.
Yeah, I use it the same way. I just, I think last week wrote a blog article about a blog about this exact thing about using AI as a thought partner. So I was talking about it in some ways about developing business strategy, but I do this often. So I'll write what I need to say in the email, and then I'll feed it into AI and say, hey, make this softer and at a ninth grade reading level. Ninth grade is the best practice in digital communication, typically when you're building websites and so on. So that's why I choose that. And so it spits back out. I'll make a few tweaks, but it makes it much more tenable than the way I initially conveyed it. So yeah, I do the same.
That's cool. All right, so you are okay. We had kind of a lot there. You've had
Yeah.
a quite a breadth and depth of experience. So we where we were kind of left off was COVID, and you're doing a lot of communications. There's a lot of crisis management with regards to, and if I recall, you said the mental health center. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So
Which, what a place to be at. So you're doing communications for the mental health center smack dab in the middle of COVID.
yeah,
Woo!
it I loved working there, and I still do whatever I can to support that department since leaving because it has such an important role in our community. Um, and I really learned a lot of things personally around coping mechanisms and my own mental health that eventually helped me get the help I needed when I finally realized I needed help for my anxiety. Um, it's kind of so coming off of that though, um, I found a random job on a nonprofit job board for executive director of Missouri Center for Employee Ownership. I had no idea what employee ownership was besides what the words themselves mean. So I did some research. I learned about ESOPs and worker cooperatives. I learned about how they can help as a business and job retention strategy when retiring business owners would otherwise maybe close their business or sell it to private equity. I learned about the social impacts of it and how it can actually close the wealth gap between every sociological demographic that there is. And then it has a lot of both the business side of negotiating things and public policy around it because there's tax implications and so on. So I kind of fell in love with this concept, applied for the job. By this point, I had just finished my MPA. But so I went out this job and I just really enjoyed it. So this nonprofit was funded by the Kauffman Foundation. It was a grant funded position. Um, Fast forward about 6 months. So we're in spring of 22. And Russia has just in the last few weeks invaded Ukraine. It was the start of that conflict. I was feeling very overwhelmed by kind of the pressures of that. Although the presidential election was over, we were now in midterm elections, and there was a lot going on there. Our state government was making a lot of decisions I disagree with. And I remember one day in particular, I was driving south on I-35 from something in either Northeast Johnson County or Kansas City, Missouri proper, back home. And I just was feeling overwhelmed by this feeling I couldn't do anything to fix any of these. But one of the coping mechanisms that I learned from the mental health center is this idea of spheres of control. it's become a lot more well known by now, but I had never heard of it back then. It's this idea that you list out everything that you're worried about, and then you identify, is this something that I can control or not? If it is, then you sort of move it into your sphere. Like if you were to do a diagram, you move it into the circle of things you can control or have action to impact. And if it isn't, then it's on the outside. So I was going through this mental exercise. I realized that there was very
By the
little
way,
I
I'm
could
like
do.
leaping out of my skin. I don't think I've heard of this concept, but I'm leaping out of my skin because I'm over here like, I just know too many people that are like, oh, the presidency in Ukraine and Israel. And I'm over here like, do you know who the local director for your chamber of commerce is, or the mayor, or I know the local sheriff. If you met with him recently, it's like, well, why does this stuff matter? It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah,
That's the guy that's going to have the most effect on your local community, and he's gonna listen and care about what you care about because he wants to get reelected. Whoever, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's so sorry. Keep going because
yeah, yeah,
it's. I think more people need to hear this. Frankly.
yeah. Um, and so when you in this exercise, to your point, you get these things that you do have some form of action you can do on, and you have other things that you can't. And there are things that, no, I can't stop Russia from invading Ukraine, but I can communicate to my U.S. senator. Like, so there are some things you can impact there, but I had this sort of epiphany moment where, in the midst of this conversation, of all the things that were stressing me out, the bad policies at our state level that were being passed was sticking out, and I was like, hey, do you know what? I can run for House of Representatives for the state of Kansas. And just like that, within a week, I had gathered a campaign team and was filing to run. I was going to face this 5-term incumbent, ran for office. Great experience. I lost, but that really ingrained me in my community and was the kickoff point for where I am now as an entrepreneur, intentionally building in Gardner, Kansas, because a lot of the things I'm doing now are built around the connections I made back in 22, including that's how I met the previous owners of the coffee shop. That's how I met my real estate agent who's been helping us navigate all these stressors. So all of that was really meaningful. I think that also was the final shift. So the last half of 22 and the beginning of 23 was the last shift for me on that spiritual plane of moving away from Christianity into now. Um, I tend to more often call myself an atheist over anything else, and that some of those experiences also like tipped the scale there for me. So then 23 comes along. At this point, we know that we're closing on Groundhouse in 24. My position at the nonprofit was still grant funded and it had an expiration date. So I knew there was a time where I wasn't going to have a job. The coffee shop, it has been growing year over year, but it couldn't support both me full time and an operations manager who could really run the day to day. And as a person who both had no experience in the food and beverage industry and struggles with small details, I knew that I couldn't remove the operations manager and just run the coffee shop. So I knew I needed an alternative revenue stream. And that's why I ended up launching Blazer Strategies. So started Blazer Strategies in fall of 23. I had about 10 months left on my grant at the nonprofit. There was a 3-month period where I was working full-time at the nonprofit. I was building Blazer Strategies, and I started serving as general manager of one of the coffee shop locations as a part of the transition. So I was like 3 full-time jobs at once. I'll never go back to that.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, so can we zero in on the spiritual transition?
Yeah,
Because I mean, this is another thing I want to kind of, talk about a little bit and transparently, my interest in here and talking about this is I feel like a lot of times, I've interviewed folks that have kind of gone the other direction with it, and just transparently and for the audience, I'm a professed Christian follower of Christ, so to speak, but I'm also very interested because I had a transitional period as well where I accepted atheism pretty wholly.
yeah,
And I kind of want to talk and zero in on that because that's not something anybody does lightly. right? I
Right.
think we have
Yeah.
this notion sometimes in our head. I was raised in a Christian church that it's like, well, why would anybody make that decision? And, surely they didn't fully consider or count the costs. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made that decision. And, I don't believe that's the truth with you. You seemed like you have a very deep understanding
Sure.
of where you're coming from and your motivators. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of zero in on what were kind of all the ingredients that
Yeah.
caused you to finally adopt that. And when you said atheism for the first time, was that, I mean, surely you didn't come to that decision overnight. Was that a culmination? So okay, pardon me, and I'm not trying to take the floor. When I remember one day very distinctly looking at my wife and being, I think I'm atheist now. And she goes, well, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't think it means anything. I think this has been true for a very distinct period of time. And I'm finally verbally confirming what I've known in my heart to be true. And then what's interesting is, for me, I call that the period of coming back to, because that's what allowed me to look at the Bible in a new lens. That's what allowed me to, I started reading Hindu scriptures and these different books just to try to kind of discover truth for myself.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I want to talk more, if you don't mind, about your experience and what the ingredients were into that. And it sounds like you'd mentioned running for a position at the House, at the Kansas House
Yeah.
of Representatives, correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. So I say that year was the tipping year, but it was really of probably a full decade of transitions that were happening. So you're absolutely right. When you, um, I think on the one hand, everybody has this natural place in their development, or ought to, where once they move away from home and are experiencing the world for themselves, they really start to solidify what they believe compared to what they believed growing up. And I think that's a pretty natural process. Uh, for me in particular, when I moved away from home, it was, after I'd already in high school found these internships when I was living away from home as a pastor. I got an undergraduate degree and then a master's degree in theology. I was a pastor. I was literally writing books on theology that were getting published and articles and all of these things, which were still very much true. And I think probably the things that really started kicking off the experience was when I really started studying the Bible. I realized that when I learned the history of the scriptures, and maybe what it meant in its initial context as being a far cry from what I was experiencing in the church. I think that's where the cognitive dissonance began. A great example of this
Hmm.
is the idea of Satan and hell. So if you read the Bible, uh, Satan isn't hardly mentioned at all. Hell, the only time the word hell is used really is in the book of Matthew, I believe, where Jesus is talking about a burning trash heap outside of town. And so right now in Christian belief, this idea of the devil and hell is more heavily influenced by Dante's Inferno than it is
Yep.
by biblical texts by any means. And so you get to see some of those things that the church.
And there's different terms, right? Like
Yeah.
Sheol and I'm not even going to get all of them correctly, but but from my limited reading, there's like 5 different terms for what we modern day colloquially just hell.
Yeah, which is not what they meant initially. So, Judaism doesn't recognize hell in the way that Christians do today, either historically or now. And Judaism doesn't really talk much of an afterlife at all. There isn't an idea of heaven in the way that there is for Christianity. Yet the entire Old Testament is written from this Jewish perspective. Jesus himself was a Jew, and so you get to some of this history. And I really want to say here, I don't in any way desire to change anybody else's mind about what
Yeah.
they believe. And I am the only person in my family of origin that is not still a Christian. I have multiple pastors in my immediate family, even to this day, and we have a great relationship. And there's not conflict there, and I'm not trying to do this. But this is my story. So that's where kind of that cognitive dissonance had begun, where what I was learning and what I was experiencing was different. Then working at the college, I supervised a staff of student employees, and about half of them any given semester were international students. And so I was just constantly exposed to different perspectives on politics and society and religion. I began to acknowledge more firsthand the way that public policy impacted people's lives. So I was working with these students when conversations around DACA came up, and what that meant, and whether these individuals who this was an immigration policy essentially that I can't remember exactly what DACA stands for, but it was children of immigrants potentially that had come in to the U.S. Undocumented, and these kids were born in the U.S. And so there was some policy around this, that if the DACA pieces had go away, that these individuals would likely have to be deported back to a country that they never knew. But I knew firsthand these, at that point, kids, right? These college students, that this would influence and impact. And so I was confronted with that. I was in that space where there was a couple of the more media coverage incidents where police killed Black men, and often under questionable ways, some of which even ended in verdicts of murder. And so all of these racial conflicts are coming up. And then the Trump presidency was a part of this too, and some of the rhetoric there. And my intent isn't to try and change anybody's mind. I'm just telling my story. But what I was continuing to find dissonance in was growing up and recognizing.
Well, to
Go ahead.
to your point, and to just kind of reset the stage, neither of us are, I'm not pushing for a political agenda or a
Yeah.
religious agenda. And my comment on She-Hole, like I'm really, what I'm more interested in is, I think too often, and this is why I love a long form podcast where we get to, kind
Yeah.
of explore human experience. You nailed something earlier when you said, it's like, as people, we often just get to experience a blip of one another
Yeah.
in the much deeper, you're going to live a long, full life, hopefully. And even that is a blip in like the collective of everybody else's lives. And so, I'm just interested in exactly what you're talking about. It's like, where did you come from religiously?
Yeah.
What got you here? Where did you come from politically? What got you here? What came from in business? Because the more we can seek to understand, the more questions we can ask to understand of each other, I think the better off we can be as a community,
Yeah,
as a whole.
absolutely. And
And
the ability
so,
to have these types of conversations in a way that expressing different perspectives in a way that really gets to the heart of the matter. And I think a lot of the superficial conversations around politics or religion tend to be around just the rhetoric that's heard in um, like talking points,
yeah,
like people
yeah,
talking points in
yeah,
some
yeah,
way.
yeah.
So you grab
And
on,
the ones that are designed to be like so polarizing, right?
right,
So polarizing and so pithy. He wants to kill, he wants to, and
yeah,
it's like, and then, but there's so much lack of truth in
right,
that,
yep,
which is what's wild, right? Because it's like we gravitate to the people that it's like, no, that is truth. No, that's exactly what he said. And the
right,
easier it is to, like, to your point about a ninth grade level, the easier it is for us to grasp onto and like, nah, that sounds true. But
right,
the reality is, in my opinion, it's just, well, not even just my opinion. I think this is true. It's just so devoid of the depth of detail necessary and understanding that at
yeah,
some point it's not even true anymore. At some point it's a
yeah.
lie.
Yeah. That's right. And I was remembering back to when you and I first met. It was kind of a random connection by LinkedIn. We got on a call,
Yeah,
and in our very first call, we ended up talking about abortion policy, and that's
we
a
did.
perfect example.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like, that's a perfect example where the rhetoric is meant to cause divisiveness.
Yep.
So when you think of, and we don't need to go down the depths. I'm just using this as an example, but
No, but I love that. I love
yeah,
this. I love this policy exchange for this example because you're not wrong. We're not even
pro-life and
talking about the
pro-choice.
stuff that
Yeah.
at that very term. We're not even
Yeah.
talking about the stuff that really matters here. I
Right.
I I have I'm gonna kind of dive in and we might have to pull out, but I am of the thorough opinion that we're not even having the conversation in the ballpark that we need to be having, which is at what point do civil liberties take into effect? Because as a society, we can agree that 18 and plus is an adult capable of making their own decisions. But even then, right? Like car insurance is more expensive until you're 25 and you can't drink until 21. You can move out and live on your own, but you can't drink until 21. Right? So we have these civil liberties that we purposely withhold. And then I was talking to a seasoned officer the other day and he gave an example of like when you detain someone, you are removing their civil liberties. You are temporarily suspending their freedoms for the sake of the society. So
Mm.
let's work backwards from that. Because we
Yeah.
also agree that at some point under 18, these individuals need care of sort. And there's a certain point where they can't live on their own. And we purposely remove a degree of civil liberties for those individuals, children, because they have to have care from other individuals. So if you work backwards, I do believe, or I hope, as a main, intelligent society could find a point in where it's like right here is where civil liberties of this degree come into effect for this individual. And here's the civil liberties we're going to take from the other individual. What degree? You know what I mean? Like there's a middle line there. And
Yeah.
I just don't know. And I'm not going to pretend to know, to be
Yeah.
clear. I don't even know if I could really argue this intelligently. I'm just
Sure.
saying I think that's closer to the ballpark discussion we should be having. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
And this is the debate, actually. I mentioned my run for office as a tipping point. This is the debate as a part of that campaign that was at the center of that experience being a tipping point because I decided to run as a Democrat. Again, this was some of my movement away from my conservative Christian upbringing, all those things I shared about my experience working at the college. I was moving away from this idea that we should always vote for Republicans because I started to find that we, as in Christians, the Christians should always vote for Republicans because I was starting to find that in almost every case, except for the case of the abortion conversation, the Republicans' policies impacted sort of the opposite values of what I had learned for Christianity to be, as far as compassion and kindness and caring for the poor and so on. And so I had registered as a Democrat, and at this point, I still had a pretty moderate view uh, on abortion. So when I started this campaign, I was against abortion, thinking that it shouldn't be used as uh, a trying to think of the word as a birth control type
Yeah.
entity, but that I thought that women should have the choice, particularly in instances that were coming from a some type of critical situation. So that's where I started. But my intent as a Democrat running with this perspective in a conservative district against a 5-term incumbent was that I was not going to talk about abortion at all. Like that was my campaign plan was not to address it.
Okay.
And then the United States Supreme Court overturned Dobbs, and abortion became the number one topic for the entire campaign cycle, no matter what level
Oof.
of office you were in. So I immediately, my campaign messaging the day that it was overturned was that I'm listening to women on this, and I don't have a place as a man to speak up and give an opinion about this in the same way that women do. So I came on that day or that weekend to a protest in response, and I was holding a sign. Somebody handed it to me that said "I'm with her," and it wasn't
Mm.
a Hillary Clinton sign. It was like the "I'm listening to women" type sign.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that was the picture that ended up on the front page of the newspaper, was the candidate
Excellent.
for state house holding this sign. A few weeks later, I got an email from a
In a
Christian.
mostly red state
Yes.
with yeah. So keep going.
Yeah. So I got this email that told me that it's impossible for me to be a Christian and a Democrat. And we interchanged a couple times from that, and the gentleman has since come back and apologized to me. But that was a significant moment, because at that time I still would have said I am a Christian and a Democrat. And so when somebody would tell me it's impossible to be both, I'd be like, "Hi, I'm here. I exist, and I am proof that it is not impossible to be both." But that was a push that year, in order for me to talk very much intelligibly on the issue, and identifying all the nuances in the issue of abortion and reproductive care. I did a ton of research, and specifically on the medical side of what that meant, and understanding the science, and then going back to the rhetoric of the most active um, like lobbyist groups, or political PACs that would be communicating their way, to be able to sort of pick apart their communication strategy. And I found that as I did that, I moved farther and farther along the ways of reproductive rights. And again, we don't have to dig too much into that for the sake of the podcast, but my position definitely moved on that, which then very much pushed me farther away from the Christian upbringing that I uh, had experienced, because I had a view that was very much in opposition to that. Kind of fast forward, I experienced in the fall of 22, my father-in-law died suddenly of a heart attack. So I experienced significant grief. I had a couple other big milestones, sort of between those avenues, where um, I tried to be a pastor again, but I couldn't get a job as a pastor. So like there's questions about this theology of calling. Until probably 2023, I finally just uh, decided that wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't have a moment like you did where you remember the first time you called yourself an atheist, because it was such a gradual, like the last step was a little tiny step, and it wasn't very critical for me. Um, but I still, and I almost only use the term atheist because it's a word that people know. I don't,
Yeah.
It's not like a badge I wear, right? Um, but there's a sense here too, where I grew up thinking that atheists were like these dark, hollow people who didn't care about anybody,
Yeah.
and who were, going to hell, and were these awful people. And I found in my own life, so one, I'm not dark or hollow. I still believe in sort of a spiritual reality, like things that can't be explained by science happening in our world and in relationships, kind of the flow of the universe. I just don't attribute that to a deity. But also, I find it very much liberating as a value-based entrepreneur. The good I'm doing it because I think it's good, not because I feel like I have an obligation of some sort to a deity to do those good things. And I know that I wouldn't have ever said when I was a Christian that was why I was doing good.
Right.
But having come out of it, looking back, that was the initial, like the initiative to do good was because of that relationship with God, and now the initiative to do good is just because it's good. And that is something I've connected with. And so a lot of the values I used to have as a Christian about caring for the poor and the oppressed, standing up to injustices, um, uh, giving people, uh, like just caring for the community around you, treating people with respect, all of those things are still very much true for me. And I just impact them, or act upon them in different ways than I used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, one of the things that affected my walk, and I don't know if I could look, it was just I think as we're growing up, we like to think we're not going to struggle with the same things that everybody else struggles with. Let's put it that way. I think at least for me, that was definitely the case, and maybe it's that simple, and maybe that's a human experience. But when I went through kind of the period where I did accept atheism, it was probably a blessing in disguise, maybe for me, maybe for other people. But I had this opportunity to, I think, minister, for lack of any other better term, to other people within the church,
Mm,
because I would come to them and you could tell there was something weighing on them and they were struggling to talk about it. And the kind of term that I would use that tend to unlock it is, I'm an atheist, so I'm not going to judge you, but maybe I will, but there's not a deity behind it, even if I
yeah.
do judge you. So why do you care? Right. And that typically was all it took for the other person to kind of come out of their shell with regards to, like, they cheated or they, whatever it was they did that you could tell was weighing on
Yeah.
them heavily, that just they didn't feel like they could talk to anybody about it. And so, yeah, anyway, man, I don't know. Yeah, it's deep stuff, this
Yeah.
life we live, right?
Yeah. That story you just told, it reminds me of so Dietrich Bonhoeffer, so pastor in Germany during World War II, and it's he was among the pastors that were trying to fight back against Hitler, and I think that he was even a part of some conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, if I'm remembering my history correctly. But he wrote in one of his books, I think it was The Cost of Discipleship, the idea that sin is something that pulls us away and isolates us from the community, and the only way
Hmm.
to go and back and be part is to confess that. And so, even within Christian tradition, historically, there's this recognition that um, when you have acted or done something that the community as a whole identifies as sin, uh, the natural piece is to pull away from everybody else, and I think that often comes because of that, the desire to categorize every action as either good or evil. Um, uh, Evangelical Christianity doesn't really have a lot of space for gray space in between. And so if you are identifying something in your life as being evil or not Christian, it naturally is separating you from others in a way of, even if you go to church or you go to a small group, when you have that in your life, you put up some kind of wall so that they can't access the full part of you. Um, and I don't know. I mean, there's thoughts that could be said about that around atheism. For one, I don't categorize every act quite so black or white. I think there's a spectrum of it because things could be both good or evil simultaneously, depending on their impacts. And so there's just less shame built into society with if you interpret the world a little differently.
Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting thing, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes people take that it's either black or it's white, is right or it's wrong. I think sometimes people end up taking that into other religions, in atheism, into agnosticism, and it. You're right that I believe that's a very significant thing, that we don't realize how deep is perforated, because it's in politics right now. It's part of the reason we can't discuss politics in the way that I wish we could. It's because this notion that if you it's I can't entertain the possibility. I'm gonna we're this isn't true, but we're talking as if I am
Yeah,
this person, Keith. I can't entertain the possibility that you might be right. Because if I entertain that possibility, that invokes the possibility that I'm wrong. And if I am wrong, that means I'm evil, I've sinned,
yeah,
and if that's the case, there's a real possibility that I'm going to hell, right? And so it's in my psyche. Psychologically, I don't want to entertain the notion that you might be right. So we can't have a real intellectual conversation, because I'm not seeking to understand. I'm seeking to justify every possibility that I'm right. Thus, I get to go to heaven. Thus, and again,
yeah,
even if it's not heaven or hell, I think we take that methodology, that ideology, with us sometimes into politics, into atheism, into and it's upsetting, because I do think that concept is what's preventing us from having a real conversation about pro-life versus pro-choice, for
Yeah.
example.
There's been a lot of interesting work around developmental theory. I think we talked about this before too, but Brian McLaren has this book, Should I Stay Christian? And he dives into this idea more in depth of putting, like layering together the stages of psychological development with spirituality. But even apart from that, there is this historical evaluation of fundamentalism. And it's not, fundamentalism is not constrained to only Christianity. You can be fundamentalist about any kind of thought, or, I mean, you could be a fundamentalist in terms of coffee in its proper use. So fundamentalism tends to be that you hold to a pretty set, boxed in set of beliefs, and you're militant about that, not necessarily in a physical, like guns and violence sort of way, but that this is the box that is true.
Yeah.
And the box, because the way the box is formed is always dependent upon all the rest, and so to pull one thing out makes the box fall in. So you think about a cardboard box. If you're not using tape and you have to put the tabs, like the flaps overlapping on top and on bottom to hold it
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But if you lose even one of those flaps, you no longer can make it into a box. It just kind of squishes into a flat piece of cardboard.
Yeah.
And that's really what fundamentalism results in being, is that you have to believe the whole thing, because if you stop believing one part, your whole belief system crashes. And I think that Trump, one of the things that he has done better than anybody else is to build up a fundamentalist perspective of government and society. And so he has built a whole systematic belief around what is good for the government to do. You see this in the terminology of "Make America Great Again." So there's some
Yeah.
sense that he's referring back to history of, hey, this is what was good, and he doesn't ever leave room for gray. So it's always what he says is good. And he creates this box, and so it really invites people that tend to perceive things from a fundamentalist perspective to find a home there, because he's built a box that they can feel safe in. But then his rhetoric makes so there is no option for an alternative perspective. And so there's a very much militant fight back against opposing views, because let's say, immigration. So right now we literally have ICE grabbing people, like you're wearing masks, grabbing people off the streets. Sometimes I read here in Kansas City, maybe 2 weeks ago, that they grabbed a mother off the streets, and deported her, leaving her 5-year-old who has autism here in the U.S. without his mom. Right. So we have this perspective, and so, but we've created this. The box is that people who are here without legal documentation, they're wrong and evil, and they're hurting the United States.
Yeah.
But if you provide an alternative perspective of, well, hey, what about this situation I just gave? Well, the militant response back is it's her fault because she shouldn't have come here illegally to begin with. But then you go even farther to say, okay, hey, um, we have this entire immigration policy that's based on deportation, and if you bring up all of the money that it costs to actually deport somebody, so we're talking about all the man hours to find them, to restrain them, to hold them, and then to ship them to another country, it actually would cost way less. I'm talking tens, if not hundreds of $1 million less, if instead of deporting those individuals who have not committed a crime, if we provided them a path to citizenship, it it would save taxpayer dollars, like hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a way less expensive avenue. And
Yeah.
just to be clear, I'm not saying that we give uh, felons the opportunity to become citizens all of a sudden, but that's a
No,
very
but the
small
system
percentage of
could use some
immigrants.
work. I
Yeah.
just interviewed a guy, his entire family was US citizens, but because of the fact that he was born in Peru at this weird time where his mother couldn't make it back to the US right in time. And so he didn't even realize until a certain age that his parents were kind of like, by the way, you're not a U.S. citizen, so there's something you might want to take care of. And he then wrestles with it for the rest of his life because he's focusing on career and he's bouncing between.
Yeah.
And to his point, he says, he's like, I maybe wasn't even all that motivated early on and blah, blah, blah. Then what's interesting is, these states, California, Texas, he indicates a much more difficult path to citizenship than, say, small town Virginia, I think is where ultimately something to that effect, where he found his path to citizenship, less bureaucratic. To his point, he was just like, there's just a lot less people. So, you're maybe the only person in the office seeking U.S. citizenship versus an overcrowded office. But we could stand to lose some bureaucracy probably on that side of the fence or whatever you want to call it,
And I think when we come back to the idea of fundamentalism in this box is that even at this point, when an individual who has this box as their belief system is presented with evidence to say that maybe, just maybe, this policy that is separating families and costing hundreds of millions of dollars is actually not good, they have a hard time agreeing to that, because if they agree to that, they lose one of the sides of their box and their whole box falls down. Because if they can't believe that Trump is right about immigration policy, then maybe he's not right about the tariffs that are increasing all the money, all the expense, the cost of everything. Oh, maybe Trump isn't right about the Supreme Court being biased, or or so on. And so
right. Well, and what's worse is it's a polarizing thing, right? It tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit, because the individual, if I were going after a fundamentalist, right?
Yeah.
You're right. I don't have to defeat the whole thing. I just have to pull one chord, and then the next chord and the next chord and the next chord, because I'm against that viewpoint entirely, versus this interesting notion where it's like, oh shoot, I'm scared to say it, but maybe the guy's done some good. In fact, I think he has done some good. Maybe more in the last term, frankly, then. But we got to be careful. We're getting too political too fast. I think we'll need to start to move to close, maybe.
Yeah. Well, let's. So
that's a perfect example. And I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day. It's a spectrum, right? And it's what's weird about fundamentalism on either sides, the person attacking the fundamentalist or the fundamentalist. We're in this weird space. It seems to me like if the person has done some good, but they've ever done some evil, we almost have to throw them all out. And I would love your opinion on this, because this seems to me to be a relatively recent concept. Like, we had these founding fathers and these people that we've respected because of the good that they've done. Now we recognize they've also done some evil, right? And then now the moment you go to reference somebody that ever did some good, it's like, well, yeah, but they also did some evil. They also did this thing, or they also did that thing. We're renaming streets and this, that, the other. And I really don't care about the street name but my point is, what I find interesting is, and I like what you're after, because I think you're correct from a fundamentalist perspective. Both sides, I think, are becoming fundamentalist enough such that it's upsetting, because it's like, well, okay, I would hope Biden did some good for his election. I would hope Trump did some good for the election before. Obama did some great stuff, and he spoke beautifully. The man was a speaker, and I'll argue anybody that says otherwise. I don't care about whether you agree on his policies or not. That man could speak beautifully. And, George W. Bush, I had the ability to interview one of his naval aides. And man, you'd listen to the way that guy responded. He got daily soldier death reports. And whether a single soldier died or not would completely impact George W. Bush's day. And so, which, you hope that that's the person at the top taken care of. But we're in this weird spot where it's like, okay, well, my political opinion says I can't agree with this guy, or I can't agree with this guy, or you know what I mean? Like the moment you pull one thread and it does fall apart,
Yeah.
it's as if you're not allowed to believe any of the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're referring to is overall this idea of cancel culture. And um,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot that could be evaluated there. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater on some things, but we don't on others. I mean, we have a convicted felon in the White House right now, and
Right.
so there's a very divisive perspective on that. Where on the other hand, um, we
And that is a
have
wild concept in
yeah,
and of itself.
exactly. So I mean, we're not canceling everybody. We kind of pick and choose, but I think that really to get to this point, um, I'm going to go back to my community. We've talked about it a lot of times that I'm a Democrat. I'm very progressive, and I am living and working and building in a very conservative community. Down the street, house with, I mean, if on my drive to the coffee shop, I'm going to drive past two, if not three houses. I can think of two right now with giant Trump flags out in front, even though that's very opposite of my own personal values. Um, but in my businesses, I don't I don't screen people based on their party affiliation or who they voted for. I have, I don't want to tell other people's stories, but I have a number of people that I do business with on every day who are very conservative, have very different views on social issues than I do, on economic issues, to the extent of not just on the political side, but religious side. Um, and what I found is most of them I work with really well. Like we actually
Yeah.
get stuff done, and there's a mutual respect about it. It clashes sometimes, so it comes out in that way, and we can talk about it and move on and make sure everyone understands what people are feeling, and we navigate that. But I think that in order for people to realize that the polar opposites that are conveyed in political rhetoric and talking points don't always ring true in the day to day. They have to be willing to um, get engaged in their community in a way that exposes them to different people. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I could
agree.
list so many people in my like last recent text messages that have different political views than I do.
No,
Uh, yeah,
I love it, and I agree. You know, it's kind of what it's become one of those things where it's like if it's a good conversation and you seem remotely intelligent and you believe something different than what I do, I think I've started to just gravitate to
yeah,
just that formula because if you adopt the notion that it makes life that much more exciting because there's so much more you don't know and you're capable of learning,
yeah.
I view it as beautiful personally.
And I think that this is about the natural growth, right? So um, my own journey, my personal journey gives me a place that I can empathize with the other person. I can understand
Mhm.
all the religious arguments as to why they believe what they believe. And so it gives me a place to understand. And I know that that's what they've learned to believe. And maybe sometime that will change and maybe not. Uh, Now, what I will say is, while I don't ever try and move somebody from their belief system, and while I do work very well with people who have different political views than I do, I also will be the first person to call out behavior, right? So I
Yeah.
want to separate belief and behavior in this case, where I don't ever try and change somebody's belief system, but I do call out behavior. This often comes out in um, in the way that we talk about the LGBTQ community, and
Yeah.
I don't tolerate discriminatory language against the LGBTQ community, and I will call that out very much, and I will put it in our employee policies uh, that we're a workplace that welcomes everybody. And
Yeah.
again, that's not giving special treatment to any one group. It's saying that it's not okay to talk bad about any people group. Like that should not ever be accepted.
Right.
That makes for a bad workplace. And so um, I don't try and change what people believe about it, but I do shape the culture of my workplaces to make sure that everybody feels safe coming to work and that they can do their jobs well.
I like it, man. Cool. So as we start to move to wrap up, There's
Yeah.
2 universal questions we like to ask folks at the end.
Okay.
So the first one, we have a mantra over here. If we have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Who's been a giant in your life, Keith, that you'd like to pay homage to in this moment?
That's a great question. The first person that comes to mind today is Steve Hines. And so Steve was, he and his wife are who owned Groundhouse before my wife and I did. And his vision for the gardener community and for the coffee shop, his engagement with Chamber of Commerce and Rotary Club and the school districts, I'm really standing on the shoulders of his vision there. When we bought Groundhouse, it was about preserving that legacy they made, so most of the community didn't even know that we bought it. It just stayed the same. But so what I'm doing now in terms of Groundhouse and the other endeavors really is the result of a lot of his vision for being a community-minded business and business owner. And he even as he has left Groundhouse, he's essentially completely retired, except for a couple of properties he manages. But he still continues to be engaged in the community in that way, and it's definitely an example that I want to continue to follow throughout my career and into retirement.
Thank you for that. So if you had one pithy saying or kind of guiding principle that you've found to be true again and again and again, what would it be?
Oh, I am known for my pithy sayings, I should imagine. But um, in the business world, one that I say a lot is outcomes over outputs. This is one of the core values at Blazer Strategies, because oftentimes we seek to measure simply check marks of things being done without actually evaluating or being concerned about what those actions produce. And I was just before this podcast, I got a call from somebody I don't know who was looking to, he was asking us to build a website for him. And he was telling me that he was getting phone calls and like marketing cold calls from other companies who wanted to build a website for him. And oftentimes when it comes from that cold call perspective, they're just trying to check the mark of building the website, where I was able to explain, here's the deal. Our best business development strategy is for you to succeed as a business. So we want to make sure that your website resonates with your ideal customers, that it helps increase your business size and your growth, because that's how we really win. And so when we build, even in our contracts and otherwise, we aren't just trying to say, yes, we're going to produce 3 social media posts a week, or we're going to host 2 leadership conferences for you. Like that doesn't move any needles. That doesn't really change anybody. Anybody can host an event or write a post, but if it doesn't actually create change, it doesn't matter. So you can use this idea of outcomes over outputs in any factor of life. And when you're just trying to decide how to use your time and your energy, well, if I use my time in this way, what are the actual results of that? I feel really busy, but maybe it doesn't change anything. And so it's a helpful one for me. And I think it's, for Blazer Strategies, one of our key differentiators from other consulting firms or marketing agencies is that we're not here just to check boxes. We're here to actually produce results. And that's served us well, both from an internal resonance sort of way, but then also from a customer satisfaction sort of way. We're still, to this day, we're reaching our 2-year birthday. 100% of our clients have come back for return work. And that's because we're committed to producing results for them.
That's good, man. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you joining me today too, and the conversation we've been able to have.
You bet. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. It's such a blessing to be able to interview such fantastic individuals. If you're interested in listening to more, we look to post every Thursday at 10 a.m. You can find us on YouTube, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much. Have a blessed day.